Okay, so this video is going to be a bit spicy because I love this hobby, right? But really, for me, hobby isn't the right word. I find that good sound is as necessary as food or exercise. But let's be honest, normal people roll their eyes when I start talking about hi-fi gear, and it's probably the same for you. So what follows are 7 reasons why the mainstream thinks audiophiles are weird obsessives.
This episode is brought to you by Eversolo, makers of the T+A, an all-in-one streaming amplifier. Click the link in the show notes for more information.
So let's start with cables. Nothing breaks a civilian's brain faster than hearing about someone who spent $500 on a power cable. And try explaining to a family member that your new USB cable widened the soundstage and see what look you get in return. So the moment you start talking about cable breaking or the sonic differences between a conductor's material composition, you've lost them. And I get it. From the outside, it sounds mental. But take a step back, and some people genuinely do hear differences between different cables. Now, I've heard them myself in numerous side-by-side comparisons, both at home and at shows, but the audiophile world's obsession with cables, so the endless online arguments, the mystical language, the high prices, they all make it easy ammunition for skeptics. The problem isn't that cables can sound different, it's that we've made the topic so fraught with conflicting claims and tribal warfare that reasonable discussion has become impossible. So when outsiders see grown men, and it's always men, arguing about whether copper delivers greater musicality than, say, silver, they're not entirely wrong to raise an eyebrow or to walk away. Now, format snobbery is also an issue. Oh, you only listen via Bluetooth? How quaint. You don't know what you're missing out on. This kind of attitude is everywhere in audiophile circles, and it's insufferable. The endless debates about whether 256 AAC is good enough or if you really need DSD to appreciate Kraftwerk properly, it's exhausting even for those of us living inside the audiophile ghetto. Normal music listeners just want to hear their favourite songs. They don't care about sample rates or bit depth or bit perfect. So when audiophiles dismiss someone's entire music collection because it's streaming at 320 Ogg Vorbis or 256 AAC, we sound like wine snobs telling somebody that their $8 bottle of Pinot Noir is piss. And as I've said many times, music first, hardware second, and format third. I've already mentioned tribalism, and nothing in the hi-fi world has become more tribal than the measurement fundamentalists versus the golden ears. Now, this internal war within audiophilia is completely baffling to outsiders. So one faction insists that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist, and the other faction claims that their ears can detect differences that no measurement rig can capture. Now, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, as always, right? But the extremists at both ends are utterly convinced of their righteousness and spend countless hours arguing online. And for somebody who just bought a soundbar from Best Buy, watching 2 factions of audio nerds wage holy war on the internet over whether 0.0001% of THD is audible, that looks like utter madness to them. Because it is. Now let's talk about the vocabulary we use. So audiophiles have created an entire language that sounds like a parody to outsiders. So things like liquid mid-range, or black backgrounds, or soundstage depth, or pace, rhythm, and timing, as if those words on their own weren't pretentious enough. So when you tell someone a loudspeaker has better Pratt, or that a phono stage lifted a veil, you sound like you're reading from a fantasy novel. Now, I use some of this language myself because it's shorthand for shared experiences, but I completely understand why mainstreamers hear people like me say the treble sounded nice and airy and think that we, or me, are making it up as we go along. Okay, this next one is a big one, pricing. So the moment you mention that your turntable cartridge cost more than most people's entire entertainment system, or that some folks spend car money on a pair of headphones, you've entered fantasy territory for 99% of the population. And the diminishing returns curve in high-end audio is brutal. And trying to explain why a 10K DAC might sound marginally better than a $1,000 one, but not 10 times better, it just makes us sound delusional. So when mainstream folks hear about 100 grand speakers or 50 grand amplifiers, they don't think investment in sonic excellence, they think hobby for rich weirdos. But then there's the flip side of this price madness, a flip side that's been supercharged by social media to become far more prevalent in, say, the last 10 years. And I'm talking about the folks who've convinced themselves, with some YouTube assistance, that expensive gear is always a scam and anyone who buys it is an idiot. Now, this inverse snobbery is just as tiresome as the snobbery that looks down on entry-level setups. And you know the type. They've got a $900 hi-fi system that they insist sounds 95% as good as anything costing 10 times more. And they'll spend hours online telling people who bought pricier systems that they've been conned. They'll hurl claims of rip-off and snake oil with zero substantiation. These are the giant killer evangelists who can't just enjoy their budget setup. They need everybody else to validate their choices by agreeing that spending more is foolish. So, hey, if you're happy with your system, brilliant. But calling someone an idiot for spending their own money on gear they can afford and enjoy, that's not being sensible, that's cope. And it makes you look petty and insecure. Right, this next one's a bit uncomfortable, but it needs saying. Some audiophiles at hi-fi shows behave like they've never been out in public before. So the lack of basic personal hygiene is real. I've been in demo rooms where body odor has competed with the sound for everybody's attention. But even worse is the utter disregard for others during demonstrations. So you're in a room where somebody is trying to showcase a 50K system, but there's always that one dude having a full volume conversation about his cartridge alignment process. Or the guy who walks in mid-demo, momentarily peers behind one speaker and then stands directly in the sweet spot to ask questions of the exhibitor as the demo music plays on. It's not just rude, it's downright baffling. And these are people who would otherwise claim to care deeply about the listening experience. And yet they'll happily ruin it for everyone else in the room. In other words, they're not afraid to be supremely selfish. And to outsiders watching this behavior, audiophiles don't look like discerning enthusiasts. They look like socially awkward obsessives who've forgotten how to function around other people. Audiophiles, yeah, we can be weird. We labour over details that most people neither hear nor care about. Some of us spend stupid amounts of money chasing incrementally better sound at the margins. And we argue endlessly about things that cannot be proven. And we use language that sounds as fictional as a Harry Potter novel. And we often forget that for most people, music is something to enjoy, not something to analyse with measurement gear or five-figure loudspeakers. And I don't think we should excuse poor behaviour at hi-fi shows or online. But here's the key thing to remember. Every hobby looks weird from the outside. So car enthusiasts spend big money on modifications that add, say, 5 horsepower. And watch collectors drop tens of thousands on timepieces that tell time no better than a $10 Casio. And wine experts can taste the difference between adjacent vineyards. We're just the ones who care deeply about how music sounds. And there are far worse things to be passionate about. Still, greater self-awareness would not hurt. maybe we could ease up on the format snobbery and the handbags at dawn on Facebook. And maybe we could acknowledge that a $1,000 hi-fi system sounds pretty damn good for the money instead of immediately pointing out everything that it gets wrong. And someone who's perfectly happy with their $400 streaming amplifier isn't a Philistine because they're not chasing the last 5% of performance. It's their money, their hi-fi system, their ears, and their choice. But the inverse is also true. Maybe we could live and let live with greater tolerance. So not everyone thinks like you or has the same level of disposable income. So if someone wants to drop 20k on a DAC or an amplifier, they can. They're not seeking your permission or approval to do so. And they're not an idiot because you'd never spend that much or because you couldn't possibly afford to spend that much even if you wanted to. So different priorities, different budgets, different listening contexts, all are valid. Again, their money, their hi-fi system, their ears, and their choices. And maybe we could shower, use deodorant, and stop talking during the demos when we're at a hi-fi show or a dealer event. And maybe we could remember that the gear we choose serves the music and not the other way around, because that's what being a music-first audiophile is all about. Because if we don't ease up on all the nonsense, prospective newcomers will just go and do something else. And they'll continue to think that we're just a bunch of ego-driven weirdos. Anyway, that's all from me for today. Like and subscribe according to your preference, and hit us up on Patreon if you want to see these videos early and without ads. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. And to someone who just bought a soundbar or a cheap hi-fi system from Best Buy, watching two factions of audio nerds wage war. And for someone who just bought a soundbar from Best Buy, watching two factions of audio nerds wage holy war over whether a God, excuse me. And for somebody who just bought a soundbar from Best Buy, watching two factions of audio nerds wage holy war over whether a 0.00001% of... And for somebody who just bought a soundbar from Best Buy, watching two factions of audio nerds wage holy war on the internet over whether 0.0001% of THD is audible, that looks like utter madness to them. Because it is.